Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're talking about one of the most famous cityscapes on the entire planet, New York City. We're going to look at how its architecture is basically a story written in stone, steel, and glass. It's a story all about ambition, innovation, and what it means to be New York.
I mean, really think about that. What if every single spire, every facade, every window told you something? Well, the thing is, it does. The New York City skyline is a history book, and we're about to learn how to read it together.
So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll talk about how to actually see buildings as stories. Then we'll jump back in time, from the city's colonial roots to the birth of the skyscraper. We'll get into that wild race to the sky, explore the radical new ideas that came after, and then, finally, we'll look at what's next.
All right, so the first thing we have to do is kind of shift our perspective. We need to see buildings not just as, buildings, but as artifacts. Each one is a product of its time. It reflects the tech, the money, and the big ideas of the people who put it there.
So let's rewind all the way to the beginning, back when New York was still New Amsterdam, a pretty practical Dutch trading post. But then after the American Revolution, everything changed. The city's architecture started speaking a totally new language, the language of a proud new nation.
And you can see that shift so clearly right here. On one side, you've got the Dutch colonial style, like France's Tavern. It's all about function, it's made from local brick, it just needs to work. But then, look at what happens after 1776 with something like City Hall. All of a sudden, architecture isn't just about shelter, it's a huge statement. Those big columns, that symmetry, that was a direct shout-out to ancient Greece and Rome. It was a way of saying, hey world, we are the new home of democracy. Okay, now let's jump forward to the Gilded Age, the late 1800s. This period just changed everything. You've got all this new industrial money flooding the city, but it was the technology that really let the genie out of the bottle. It's what allowed architects to stop building out and start building up.
So how exactly do you build a skyscraper? Well, it turns out there is a secret recipe with 3 key ingredients. First, you need that revolutionary steel skeleton. It's super strong but also light. Second, you absolutely need a safe elevator, right? Because nobody's walking up 20 flights of stairs. And finally, you need a fireproof skin, like terracotta, to wrap the whole thing up. You needed all 3. Without them, the skyline we know today just wouldn't exist.
And this new way of thinking was captured perfectly when the Woolworth building opened its doors. People immediately started calling it the Cathedral of Commerce. I mean, just think about that nickname. This wasn't just some office building. It was a shrine to business, using that soaring, church-like Gothic style to make you feel awe. Not for a higher power, but for the power of commerce itself.
So all of that just set the stage for the city's most legendary era, the Roaring '20s. This was a time of pure Art Deco ambition, where big companies got into a literal race to see who could build the tallest building on the entire planet.
But there was a pretty big problem. As these huge towers shot straight up from the ground, they started throwing the streets of Manhattan into permanent shadow. You had these dark, sunless canyons, and city planners were getting really worried.
The city's solution was actually pretty brilliant in its simplicity. It was the 1916 zoning resolution. This law basically said that new buildings had to set back or step away from the street as they got taller. And this one little rule didn't just let the sun back in. It accidentally created that iconic, tiered wedding cake shape that we all associate with New York's greatest Art Deco building.
The absolute peak of this race was, you guessed it, the Empire State Building. When it was finished in 1931, it topped out at a jaw-dropping 1,250 feet. It just completely smashed every record that came before it.
And get this, here's the fact that really puts that number in perspective. It stayed the tallest building in the world for almost 40 years. 40. That's just an incredible testament to the sheer scale of its ambition, and it became a symbol of American strength right through the Great Depression.
But styles change. After all the fancy decoration of Art Deco, and after the trauma of World War II, things felt different. A new generation of architects started to push back against all that ornament, and they started asking a new question. What should a skyscraper really look like now?
And this kicked off a kind of philosophical war fought with glass and steel. First, you had modernism, with its cool, sleek mantra, less is more.
Buildings like the Seagram building became these beautiful, unadorned boxes. But by the 70s, another rebellion was kicking off. Postmodernism fired back with less is a bore. And suddenly you get buildings like the AT&T Tower that brought back color, playfulness, and even historical jokes, like that famous Chippendale top. It was a direct rejection of that pure minimalist style.
So where does that leave us today? What does ambition look like in the 21st century? Well, it's changed again. The race isn't just about being the tallest anymore. Now, the big ideas are things like sustainability and green architecture, resilience and memory, which you see in One World Trade Center, and creating spaces for people, like the High Line. All of it is being pushed forward by incredible new technology.
So, what's the big takeaway from all of this? I think it's that the story of New York's skyline is an unfinished one. It is always being written. Every generation adds its own chapter, responding to the challenges and the dreams of its own time.
So let's just quickly retrace our steps one last time. We went from practical colonial and idealistic federal buildings to that huge eruption of the first skyscrapers. Then came the famous Art Deco race for the sky, followed by the less is more of modernism, the less is a bore of postmodernism, and finally landing on today's focus on sustainability. It's been quite a ride.
And that really leaves us with one final big question. As New York faces a whole new set of challenges, climate change, housing, new technology, what story is the next generation of buildings going to write on its skyline? What will that next chapter say to the world? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.